So, death marks. They're a fairly short-range sniper unit, but what good is a sniper unit if it's so close? Well, today we're going to answer that question as well as how you can get the most out of your death marks. And that's coming right up. Welcome back, and it's great to have you here. If this is your first time here, here's what's up. If you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then be sure to smash the subscribe button and ding the bell. That way, you won't miss anything. Now let's crack on into talking about death marks and what they're good for on the tabletop. So, for the death mark profile, we're talking a 5-inch movement, which for Necrons, it's fairly average. We're talking 3+ to hit in both ranged and close combat, although generally speaking, death marks don't find their way to close combat that often. We have strength 4, toughness 4, 1 wound, 1 attack, leadership 10, and a 3-up armor save. So it pretty much has the same profile as an immortal, which as far as 8th edition 40k goes, is a pretty reasonable baseline. Now, the gun that the death marks have is the Synaptic Disintegrator, and yes, it is as scary as it sounds. Sort of. So, it is rapid fire 1, which, I mean, if you're close, you're getting 2 shots. With a squad of 10, that's reasonable, I suppose. It's strength 4, which is fairly average. No AP, which for Necrons, unless it has some kind of special rule to it, is a big no-no. Although the Synaptic Disintegrator does have a special rule to it, so maybe it won't be that much of a problem. And then it only does 1 damage, which is kind of disappointing given what kind of weapon this is supposed to be representing. So the Synaptic Disintegrator does have a special rule, and this special rule allows it to target characters even if they're not the closest thing, so pretty standard for a sniper weapon. And then on a 6+ to wound, it is dealing a mortal wound in addition to its standard damage. And given that it is rapid fire, which means if you're close, you're getting 2 shots apiece, squad of 10, you're going to get a couple of 6s to wound there, which means you're going to deal a couple of mortal wounds, which is pretty good. Just as a little side note, it does say on a 6+. So if you have anything that modifies the wound roll of your ranged weapons, if you modify your 6 to a 7, it's still dealing mortal wounds, similar to the way it works with Tesla weapons to hit. Now, the death marks have 2 special rules in addition to their reanimation protocols, which is a standard for all Necrons. So, the death marks extra special rules are Hunters from Hyperspace and Ethereal Interception. So, Hunters from Hyperspace allows them to deep strike effectively, deploying more than 9 inches away from any enemy units, which does put them in the perfect distance for rapid firing their Synaptic Disintegrators, but it also does make them quite vulnerable. And as we'll discuss shortly, this is one of the reasons why I prefer to take larger units of them rather than smaller units. So, where the death marks really shine is with their next special rule, which is Ethereal Interception, which allows you to deploy your death marks in your opponent's turn just after your opponent has deep struck a unit. So say you're fighting something that loves to deep strike, such as Grey Knights. So your enemy deep strikes some Grey Knights in, and you don't want them there. So you now have the opportunity to deep strike your death marks in straight behind them, given that you have to deploy more than 9 inches away from your enemy, but within 12 of the unit that just deep strike in, your opponent may be able to block you from doing this. So it is something you do need to watch out for. But you then get to shoot at that unit that just deep struck in, which is pretty cool because you are now shooting at your enemy in their turn, which can be rather demoralizing at the best of times. And because you have to deep strike within 12 inches of the unit that just came in that you are now shooting at, it means that you are in fact shooting with the rapid fire, meaning a squad of 10 of these guys is firing 20 shots. And I'll let you do the maths on that, but it means you're going to get a couple of mortal wounds off, which is fairly good, especially if it's stuff like a character that's coming in. So, how do we use death marks to get the most out of them? Well, basically, I've got 2 tactics for you. One uses a unit of 5 guys and the other uses a unit of 10. So starting with the tactic using a unit of 5 of these guys, basically you're using them as a suicide squad. So the idea here is that you are going to deep strike them in deep into enemy territory, and you are basically just going to use them to wreak havoc for one turn, because a unit of 5 of these guys is going to go down pretty damn quick if your opponent does not want them there. And believe me, your opponent is not going to want them there. So basically, you can use them to either draw some fire away from other stuff, or you can use them in the case of an enemy that is a more close combat oriented army. You can use them to either slow their advance or to force your opponent to pull some of their units back. Which of course, in a game like 40k, which has a finite number of turns, if you're making your opponent pull units back, then that's more turns that they're going to take to get to the stuff that you really want to keep safe. So you can also run these guys in units of 10, in which case it's going to cost you 200 points, which for what they can do is not a huge amount, and a unit of 10 is reasonably durable, provided you don't throw them in on your own. So when you run units of 10, you're best off waiting until you get a few more things up the field so that they're deploying relatively close to other units to draw some of the fire away from them, because you don't want them to be soaking up your entire opponent's shooting phase, because they will die in most scenarios if you do that. Now, in this case where you're taking a unit of 10, you're more likely to deploy them closer to center field, because by the time you really want them on the field, that's where both armies are going to be more or less. So they may be back a little bit because you're not able to deploy them in quite that far due to having to be 9 inches away from your opponent. However, if you take a couple of units of 10, you can hammer and anvil your opponent, which is fairly effective, because I don't know of many people that would be particularly pleased about having 10, 20, 30 death marks appearing behind their front lines. Kind of annoying, if you ask me. Now, because the death marks, like all snipers, can target characters even if they're not the closest thing, that means that the death marks, given the sheer volume of shots that they get and the mortal wounds that they deal, are very, very powerful at taking down enemy characters. So let's say hypothetically that your opponent has their Gravis Armor Captain, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, and he is letting your opponent reroll stuff and you don't want them to be doing that. You bring your death marks in and you fire all of your Synaptic Disintegrators at him. You're going to deal a couple of mortal wounds, and you're either going to kill him or bring him close to being dead. Which of course is what snipers like Deathmarks are meant to do. The difference between most snipers and the Deathmarks is though that they are able to deep strike. So you can leverage this to take advantage of opponents' mistakes when they leave gaps open. Because as I've said before, if you can control what your opponent's doing, or at least heavily influence their movement, then that gives you a huge advantage. Oh, and I almost forgot, because Deathmarks do have deep strike and they are as cheap as they are, they're pretty good at securing objectives late game. So for this scenario, I would recommend just having a unit of 5. Because you are late game, if you took second turn, there's a reasonable chance your opponent's not going to get to shoot at them or attack them at all, which means you don't really need to worry about unit size as long as you're on the objective. Obviously, this only really works if your opponent's not already on the objective, but if you take the objective down from range, but you're not able to quite get another unit in close enough, you can throw some death marks on it from deep strike, which is a fairly good way to take objectives late game, provided that your opponent's numbers are reasonably thin, because the death marks have to be at least 9 inches away from any of your opponent's units. So death marks, just a quick recap, you're best off using units of 5 for mucking up your opponent's positioning and forcing them to make moves that they don't really want to make, but you're giving them no other choice really. You can also use them for taking late game objectives, provided that you are not playing in matched play, because I'm fairly sure that you can't deep strike any later than turn 3 in matched play. And if you take units of 10 of them, they are very, very good at taking down those characters that are just causing you headaches because of the mortal wounds they deal, as well as the sheer volume of shots that a unit of 10 of these guys gets. and they're able to target characters, which obviously for taking down characters is a very good thing. So if you have any strategies that you like to use with your death marks, please chuck them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear about it. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so we know that you like it, so we can keep making stuff that you like. And as always, if you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then be sure to smash the crosshair and ding the bell. You'll subscribe and I'll be able to share with you more battle reports, terrain tutorials, and strategies to make your wargaming experience more epic. And I'll see you next time.